Hi, I'm Diana, and I'm sitting here with managing partner Sandra Ziskind, and we're sitting here with Toronto Police Officer Shapiro. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
I love it. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about DUIs. We're so excited to have you on the show today, only because you do so much for, I want to say, the younger generation with all you do on TikTok and all the things that you talk about, is just mainly police, traffic-related matters, so highway traffic deaths.
I like to say I talk about traffic safety, traffic law, and police stuff, but sometimes it's donuts, and a lot of the time it's just questions about tinted windows. But we're talking to everybody, though. It's not just kids. It's grandparents about how to put car seats in for their little ones, or the little ones. We're talking about everything.
Yeah, I mean, I just got TikTok, so I feel like I'm part of that generation.
You really are not. But I think it's important. I think what you're doing is so important because social media now, as we know, is the platform that most people listen to and get information from. So it's really important, especially with safety, that they get accurate information, and getting it straight from the police makes what you do so important.
Oh, I loved it. It took me hours to get through a few of your posts, so... Let's start with the actual definition of a DUI. Who wants to take this one?
I'll let you go with this, but I was just going to say, with DUI or driving under the influence, of course it can be alcohol or marijuana or any drugs of any kind. But I would say I did see a big uptake in driving under the influence during the COVID times, where it wasn't safe to take an Uber per se, but let's drink and drive and go home. But yes, for sure. Let's start with the definition.
Well, in terms of, I like to leave things in the simplest of terms. It's driving under the influence is driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol, whether that be prescription drugs, illegally obtained drugs, legal drugs, of course, alcohol. And it's driving under the influence or impaired operation, which is really what we're looking for more often than not, is seeing someone who isn't operating a motor vehicle normally and is then investigated, and it's determined that they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol.
So if I have too much Benadryl, that's okay?
No, it's anything.
Anything,
really.
Yeah, because the idea is you should be safely maneuvering a motor vehicle at all times. And if you're unable to do it, you shouldn't be driving.
If you're behind the wheel of a motor vehicle, you're responsible for doing that safely. And that means without putting yourself or anybody else at risk. And of course, the technicality of when we're looking at that particular charge is that of drugs or alcohol. But if you're a menace behind the wheel, there's other reasons to look at you. So it's where the choose your own adventure goes once we start investigating you. But I pulled people over who were just really engrossed in a conversation with their mom on text, driving a car, and we thought they were impaired. Turns out they were just texting. So the appropriate charges are laid. Of course, the consequences are different depending on what you were up to. Careless driving is, $495, 6 points. You're using a cell phone, $615. Points depends on how many times you've been charged and convicted. And then you've got impaired, which has, it's criminal. Now you're in a different realm.
Whoa. With the criminal system and did you see the uptake in COVID like I did of drinking and driving for everything, right?
Stunt driving for impaired operation. People claim that it's because they needed to distress. Stress is a big thing. People in crisis. Nobody likes change. But there's never an excuse.
Right.
What are the police looking for? That's my first, one of my first questions. What are you guys looking for? You're out on the road. Is it just some swerving? Is there some erratic driving? What is it key factor? Or somebody just even driving too slow?
I like to reference my spidey senses because they tingle a lot. Okay. And very often I pull someone over just because they edge too close to the center line. I watch them do something that was it just struck me as off. Mm-hmm. And we can always pull you over to check to make sure you're a licensed driver, an insured driver, and that check your level of sobriety. And now with mandatory alcohol screening, which was introduced in 2018, that means that even without the suspicion of alcohol in your blood, we're able to demand a roadside screening device test, which allows us to make the determination. And it's without bias. It could be every car I pull over for speeding or for anything. You're going to perform a test, and we're catching people at all hours of the day and night.
And just so for all those people who think they're super smart, which they are not, refusing to take the test is a criminal offense in and of itself, correct?
It is, and don't threaten us with a good time. It is so much
yes.
It is so much more straightforward to convict someone for refusal than it is to convict them for having failed a test. You get the same consequences as though you failed. Had you, but when you blow, you might actually not fail. You might get a suspension,
right?
Because you could be under,
right?
You could fail roadside, and by the time you get get to the police station for your secondary test, because the roadside screening device isn't where it ends.
Right.
That's so that the officer can develop suspicion or grounds for an arrest. And then once you come to the station, you have to perform 2 subsequent tests with a qualified breath technician. At that time, you may have sobered up a bit. You might not be convicted or charged for the offense of being 80 and above, because you may not qualify for it by the time that test occurs. So there's a lot that goes into it, but refusal, it's cut and dry.
And the roadside test, the reason you have to do the secondary test is because it's not as effective?
The secondary test, one, you may still be dealing or processing the alcohol. It could be going up. It could be going down. It's. I'm not a breath technician. I can't I can't speak to why they do 2 in its most official of ways.
Right.
But I know that it's required by court.
Got
It's funny
it.
that you say that it goes up, because I find, like, you're out with your friends, you're drinking, you have, a couple of drinks, 4 drinks, and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, it hits you all of a sudden. You're like, okay, I should probably go home now.
Well, that's the exact thing. So
Safely.
some folks will take the traveler, they'll take that one for the road. And that could be the difference between being not so bad to really, messy.
Right.
And that's what you can't factor. And people deal with alcohol differently. Everyone's going to be absolutely different.
100%. Like, I know with me, if I haven't eaten anything that day, Diana knows I'm not the best at holding my alcohol
Great
anyways.
Date. Real
Cheap
cheap
date.
fellas.
So
One cocktail.
that's it. I know one cocktail that said I can't drive, I can't do anything anymore, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be that level of intoxicity, right?
But for argument's sake, I need to know. I gotta know this, okay? Because so you keep saying 80. What is the limit? Like, how do you compare it? Is it a bunch of tequilas? Is it like 3 beers? Is it?
That's like the most common question. How many drinks can I have and still be safe to drive? Well, the
If
answer,
you're a G licensed driver, you can have some, right?
if you're a G licensed driver and you're over the age of 21, which means you're 22 and above. So you must maintain 0 alcohol if you are 21 or younger, and
You're that kids?
even if you have a G.
Yeah.
And if you have a learner's permit, G class, M class, or sorry, G1, G2, M1, M2, those are all learner's permits. Those are 0 blood alcohol content. Of course, people who have commercial motor vehicle licenses and are operating commercial motor vehicles, they must maintain a 0 alcohol
Also
content as
0.
well. Yeah.
Okay.
How come G licensed 22 plus are allowed to have like a little bit in them, and then the
That's a really good question, because I'd love to see a 0 for everybody.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, there's really never a good mix, because to be impaired could be any amount of alcohol,
Right.
even if you don't meet the threshold for what is mandated by under law. Like 0.05 is a suspension for blowing what they call a warrant. That's 0.05 to 0.079.
0.05 is 1 beer.
Well, it depends on everyone's
But it
different.
depends on the person, right?
Right,
Like
yeah.
it might be on me, it might be more, right? It might be different for each person.
Really?
It really depends on how you metabolize alcohol, how much time since. And I can't speak to that. That's not my department. But I can tell you that one might be okay for somebody and not for another. And that one that here's a great example. I saw a fantastic video when I was a new recruit, and it was the parade. Prisoners get paraded before an officer in charge of a station when they're brought in and booked for an offense. So there was a gentleman who was arrested for impaired operation, and he was paraded before the staff sergeant who was in charge of the station at the time. He was falling down drunk. There was a video later that was shown, and it was a woman who was straight as an arrow being paraded. Well, the man had 100. He blew 100 thereabouts. The woman had 400.
Wow.
4 times the amount of alcohol. That probably would have killed him, but she was a professional.
She was fine.
She looked normal, but she failed.
Is it called functioning alcoholics? Maybe on that level.
Correct.
Right. That's
correct.
So, but, okay, and then if you blow over, is it automatically jail time?
Jail time is it comes from a conviction, right?
Video jail. You do this, jail.
Preto
You do
jail.
this,
Preto jail. I love that video. So if you get a warrant rating, you're not being charged. You're being suspended roadside. It's an administrative penalty. If it's your second warn within 10 years, I believe, the penalty goes up. So instead of 3-day suspension, it's 7-day. I think it goes to 10-day on the third time, if I'm not mistaken. When you talk about a charge being laid for impaired operation, you're looking at a 90-day suspension. You're getting a 7-day impound of your vehicle, which is actually lower than stunt driving. Stunt driving is a 14-day impound of your vehicle. So it's just a matter of time until that is brought up, I imagine. So now you've been charged. But when you get to court, if you're found guilty in court, that's when other conditions take place. You can get direction from the court to disqualify you from driving.
Well, that thing that you blow into the car so it starts?
That's an intoxilizer that allows you to get back into a car faster. As long as you've done everything else, after a year, you can get into the not intoxilizer,
It's a little, we'll call it the little.
it's called the intoxilizer.
Right, you got to blow into it to
Interlock.
get it
It's
right.
Interlock.
Yeah.
It took me a second, but that's an Interlock.
Just jumpstart
Oh,
the
we
car
got
with your
there.
breath.
And then other things like I had a guy that was driving a loaner car from his dealership. He was driving a nice Mercedes on the 401. I pulled him over for, I think, cell phone. Turns out he had an interlock condition, which meant he can only operate vehicles that have interlocks in them. That vehicle got impounded, even though it was a loaner from the dealership. So there's all sorts of consequences, and not to mention the fact that an interlock program costs you about $300 to $500 a month for the joy of having that machine put in your car.
I should also mention, because we're, with the interplay between insurance and what you do, if you're convicted of a driving under the influence, it's a criminal conviction. So if you get into an accident and you've been convicted for that same accident, driving under, your coverage is vitiated. It's limited to $250,000. I know.
Good
I'm
word.
sorry.
I've never heard
I'm
of
sorry.
that,
Vitiated. So your coverage
What's the
is
definition of vitiated?
So your coverage is denied, essentially. They do the $250,000 minimum, which they have to do under the law. And so let's say you had $1 million, or like we've spoken about before, even more, you don't get the benefit of that coverage. So you go and you hit somebody drunk, you kill them or horribly wound them, and you have $1 million worth of coverage. The insurance company, after conviction, not just a charge, but a conviction, can cap your coverage at $250,000. So now you're personally on the hook for any damage you've done above and beyond, because it's a criminal conviction. So any criminal convictions changes your insurance policy. So not only do you have issues, obviously, with the court and with the record, but now the person suing you, they could go after your house. They can go after your livelihood. It's really problematic.
I didn't know about that, so
Yes.
I've never talked about it online. You should come on my podcast to talk about it.
I would be happy to, but it's actually a real problem, right? Because you want the person to be convicted from a sort of altruistic thing, but then for your client, you're like, oh.
So what happens here? He books somebody with a DUI, and then that person gets processed, whatever the case may be. Your insurance company, as far as I knew, insurance companies, once a year, where they're renewing, they'll look back at your thing. Are they immediately alerted to the charge?
After a conviction's registered, they'd be able to see it. But the truth is, they don't always see it. So if someone's changing their rates, or if the company has a policy to renew regularly or review regularly, then it might be caught. But some people may not see it.
They're supposed to only see it when there's a conviction, not when there's a charge.
They wouldn't see the charge.
The insurance company's not looking for it, but if they do, you get the boot.
Yeah, you don't necessarily get the boot, but your insurance rates are gonna go through the roof, because now you're an unsafe driver. I mean, this is all about
like
decision making.
aside, like your rates and all that stuff, your liability, all that stuff. I'm assuming that then it goes down to that $250,000 you were talking about.
So to the $250,000 is the minimum coverage in Ontario that you have to have. But most people have $1 million policy. So what I'm saying is, if there's a conviction of any kind for any criminal act, drunk driving being one of them, then they limit the coverage to $250,000. And $250,000 doesn't go far in this day and age, for sure, but certainly not if you're hitting multiple people. I've had many incidences with impaired drivers, and God bless them, they don't manage to get just one, they get multiple cars. And that $1 million is supposed to cover everything in that incident. It's not million for you. It's not Oprah, right? Like it's all goes down to the $250,000. So then it's really problematic from an insurance point of view.
Right.
But for the drunk driver themselves, it's also problematic, because now they're personally liable and on the hook.
What happens in the case that, somebody creates a car accident and they're charged with a DUI, he takes care of the processing and whatever, then your client, you are representing the person that was injured by the drunk driver, the person under the DUI. Do you still have those limits available to you?
You only have the $250,000. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, but it's automatic.
Yeah, well, once it's a conviction, yes, once it's a conviction, that's it. Any criminal conviction. So even if there was a if they used the vehicle as a weapon to hurt somebody or kill somebody on purpose, any criminal conviction will bring it down to the $250,000.
Wow.
So it's problematic from all sorts of sides. And then, of course, for the innocent victims, their coverage has now gone down to $250,000. I mean, they have their own insurance that hopefully they have. But let's say they don't have insurance, then they're SOL, because they're now stuck with the $250,000.
What about pedestrians, cyclists,
correct,
e-bike riders? Those are all people who don't have coverage of their own.
Right.
Maybe have a policy they can go to and rely entirely on the other person.
Right, and so they're stuck with the $250,000, and but the drunk driver is technically on the hook. So the pedestrian or the cyclist could go after the drunk driver personally. They have a house, they have assets.
Oh boy.
It's problematic. It's problematic from all ends.
It's a really despicable thing to do, I think. For the longest time, I always thought that alcohol was the kicker. I did not know that you can take enough Benadryl and maybe have a little wooze and go for a drive. I didn't know that was covered out. One of the bigger things for me was like when marijuana became legal. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't understand how a police officer, because you pull somebody over, they're driving all erratically, right? You pull somebody over and you're like, you smell it right away, right? Or you get some sort of whiff where you can see from their eyes that they're a little drunk. What are the tells for marijuana?
Well, there could be so many things. I mean, the car doing 20 kilometers an hour in a 60 is usually a hint.
Just like,
but impaired is impaired. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. Yes, the odor may be different and the attitude may be different. Much friendlier people on marijuana. But at the end of the day, it's the suspicion that they're under the influence of drugs at that point. And we have drug recognition evaluators, people who can actually put you through a battery of tests, and based on your performance during those tests, they can determine not only that you're under the influence of drugs, but what family of drugs that you're under. So it's quite in depth. I'm not one of them, but for people who have just something in their system, we do have a mouth swab, buccal swab system that will analyze for cocaine or marijuana. Wow. But that's not for court. That's for roadside administrative purposes. It's the drug recognition evaluator who's going to be really taking you to task and after the fact.
So a DUI is going to take a little while. That charge is going to take a little while to come down, I'm assuming, from all the tests that they have to do.
Well, it's going to be done that night. Like, you're taken directly to an officer on it. It's processed right away. And then from there, you're going to be getting the same consequences as if you were found to be over 80. Yeah, but okay. Or 80 over.
I have to ask, doesn't weed stay in your system longer than alcohol does?
And that's where you talk about...
if you smoke a joint last week, not I... If you were Sandra, nope, none of us.
Nope, none of us.
If someone had smoked a joint a week ago at a party, if a person had a week ago had smoked a joint at a party, and then a week later is driving their vehicle, maybe they were a little lost on the road or whatever, they get pulled over, you suspect...
No. Somebody with dated access, yes, you may have levels in your system, but you're not going to have signs of impairment based on that. And that's, again, not my area of specialty, but my understanding is you have to have signs directly. And we'll rule out alcohol because you can perform a breath test while you're with one of these evaluators.
Right. Right. So it's everything probably in tandem, right? It's the driving erratic and the drugs and everything else at the time.
That's honestly, this is all good information. I think everyone needs to know this because I feel like a lot of people just think that they could have the one drink or they could have the one joint or they could have the whatever. And there are avenues to get booked for it. So be careful out there.
The idea is if you're going out,
you're going to go have a good time.
And you're going to have a good time. There's Uber, there's cabs, there's enough things in this world right now that we don't have to take any risks, and you don't need risks with your insurance, and you don't need risks with jail, and you don't need to lose your house because you were stupid one night.
I don't even need to lose my car for that long. I'll tell you that much.
I rely on my wheels. It's part of my life. I would never put anybody at risk for saving $50 on a cab ride type thing. And that's it. There's no undo button. And for those that have gone down this path, and we have people who have taken lives and they speak at MAD events, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, they speak to people about what they had as the person who took a life.
Right.
There's a lot of guilt and aside from all the financial and impacts.
Yeah. All right, everyone, there you have it. You heard it from a police officer himself and a personal injury lawyer. Under no circumstances should you be operating a motor vehicle under any drug, alcohol, prescription medication, anything of that sort. Use the services that are available to you, taxis, Ubers, friend, pickup service. There are no excuses. Be safe out there, everybody. Thanks, guys.